So welcome to this video tutorial on how to create a professional explainer video using AinTrailers Explainer Video Toolkit for Adobe After Effects. Now, AinTrailer has a mission to enable everyone with even the basic knowledge of Adobe After Effects to create their own professional animated videos by making the process faster, easier, affordable, and lots of fun. So in this series of video tutorials, we're going to take a detailed look at what's inside AinTrailers and sample some of the more than 3,000 elements to craft this story. So we're going to look at elements such as characters, objects and icons, buildings, backgrounds, compositions, typography, promo services, infographics, motion shapes, speech bubbles, shape elements, transitions, display elements, hands, logo reveals, foreground styles, FX motion presets, and so much more. So the project that we want to create is a personal resume. So to get started, we've used the element guides to get an idea of the kind of elements that we can use to tell our story. So using the element guides, we were able to put together this initial storyboard for our personal resume. So the final storyboard, we're going to walk you through several different scenes, which will cover most of the elements that you've seen in this story. We're going to skip over a few of the scenes because the elements that are covered in there have been repeated and shown in other scenes. So here's just a brief selection of the elements that we're going to demonstrate how to use in this particular tutorial. But first, let's take a look at what the final result looks like.
Audio Jungle.
Okay, so we're now starting the process of creating scene 1. So for this scene, we're going to need sections from AinTrailers. Specifically, we're going to need the male characters, typography, and speech bubbles. So you ready? Let's get started. So in the first scene, the first thing you want to do is you want to head over to the text documentation. You'll find this in the AinTrailers folder. So once you double click that, you then find this index file. When you click that, it opens up in a brand new browser. Now this shows you all the necessary materials that come prepackaged with the AinTrailers. So you can have a look at the different character templates that we have built in, as well as things like typography. You can have a look at, there's a vast range of elements and sections that you find within this folder. There's a wide range of different elements, templates, and sections that you find in AinTrailers. So we want to start off with a blank project. First thing we want to do is let's create the first composition. This is going to be the main composition. So let's give it a frame rate of 24 frames per second, a resolution 1920 by 1080. That's fine. Duration, let's put that at 50 seconds, and then we click OK. So that's our main composition. Now let's just reduce the resolution to about a third, because this improves the performance when we're working with these templates. So the first composition we want to create is actually this first scene. So let's create a new composition. Let's call that part 1. So this first composition is going to be, let's put it at 15 seconds long. Each of the scenes that are going to make up our overall composition, we're going to name them part 1, part 2, part 3, etc. So this is the first of those parts. So now if we open our AinTrailers folder and we go over to this element guides, we can see all the different elements summarized in one image, which allows us to see exactly what type of element to bring into our project. So first we simply click import, then we go over to the characters. In this case, we want the male characters template. So we're going to import that into our project. Next, we want to import the speech bubbles and the typography templates. So now we have all the templates that we want for this particular scene. The first thing we want to do, let's create a new solid layer. Now this solid layer, it has the same dimensions as our composition, 1920 by 1080p. Let's just call that background. And now let's choose the background color. This one will do just fine. Click OK. And there we have it. That's our background. We can lock this background layer. So in the package folder, we have a folder called element guides. So here you can see a preview of all the sections. So we want to have a look at the typography and select the type of typography that we want. So we're going to drag that typography, short type on 1, that's the one we want, bring that into our composition, resize it, let's go with 50%, that works. Let's do exactly the same thing with the speech bubbles. This time we want to choose this one here, number 3, that looks good. So again, let's expand the files here. We identify that, we bring it into the timeline. And for now, we can hide the speech bubbles and the short typo. Next, we want to add a character and add some animation to the character. So open up the main animation folder. In here, we're going to look for this pre-comp here that is called greeting. I think it's number 14, exactly this one. Let's bring that into the timeline. We may have to resize that a bit. So let's go with 50%. That looks just about right. Actually, maybe let's increase that slightly, 82%. Yeah, that looks just right. Next thing we want to do is to work with the emotions of our character. So what we're going to do is we're going to expand this greeting pre-comp. So let's double click to open that. And then what we want to do is we want to go to the element guides, select the male characters guide. And then from here, we can see exactly how we want to customize the appearance of our character. So you can see different parameters such as the costume, the head shape, the hair, the mouth expressions. There's so many variables that you can change, gestures, etc. So I've made a note of the ones that we want. So all I do is I select the main controller layer and then go to the effect controls panel, from which I can now customize the character to match what we want from the storyboard. We can hide certain elements that we don't need, like glasses. So we can change things like the outfit. We can change the shape of the head, the hairstyle. As you can see, there are many different variables to really customize it to a character that suits your particular use. Next, we're going to work on the facial expressions. So first of all, we want to highlight the current emotion, which is gladness. And then we look for the one that we want to substitute it with. In this case, it's the winking. And then all you do is you drag the winking animation whilst holding down the Alt key, and then you drop it right on top of the existing emotion to replace it. And there you have it. We've changed the emotion to the winking emotion. So let's hide this layer for now and bring back the typography. And now all we do now is we customize our typography to match the storyboard. Also changing the text from black to white to make sure that it stands out against our background. Now we bring back the character so that we can animate its position. So this you do by entering keyframes and then moving our character out of the frame on the first keyframe, and then the second keyframe is our character in the final position. So you can play around until we get the exact animation that we want. We can do the same thing to the text, have that animate from this initial position to this second position right here. We can also just slightly reduce its size about as it animates. So it starts over there and then it decreases in size. And now back to the speech bubble that we've imported. So let's bring that on top. We only want one of these two bubbles, so let's double click that. And then you may find you need to unhide all the layers. So select all these layers from the blue bubble. We don't need to work with those, so you can switch those off. And then next, all we have to do is we customize the text of the bubble that we want to use. Make that this right size that we want. And then we can change its color, obviously, as well as the background color of the actual bubble itself. Let's make that white. So now all we have to do is see how that speech bubble fits in with the rest of the elements in this composition. In this case, we just have to resize it, reposition it, and make it slightly smaller. And then change its starting position so that it animates like this. And so that's the end of our scene 1. So we're now starting the process of creating the second scene. So for this scene, we're going to need the following sections from AinTrailers project file. First, we're going to need the characters, specifically the male characters. Then we're going to need backgrounds. Next, we're going to need the typography template. And then lastly, we're going to need the compositions. So you ready? Let's get started. So first of all, we want to start off by creating a new composition. Let's name that part 2. Next, we want to start off by importing a background. Head over to this element guide, double click that, and that reveals this 04 background scene. So this gives me an idea of all the backgrounds that are available should I choose to use one of these. And I'm going to settle for this one under home, this particular one, this study. That looks quite good for this scene that we're doing right now. So all I have to do is import the file. Then I scroll over to separate background scenes. And then the one we want is the home backgrounds, because that's where we saw the study background. So once we import that, we expand its contents. Then we go to the background scenes themselves. We want the colored scenes, and obviously it's the home one. And then there it is, the home study one background. We bring that into our composition. And that's what it looks like when it animates in place. Pretty cool. Next, we want to open up the male characters. Let's go into the man animation. So here we're now looking for a particular action that the man is doing. This one standing with one leg bent, that looks like something we could use. So let's drag that into the timeline. Okay. The first thing we want to do is just resize that to 50%. That's better. Okay. And let's just drag it to the side just like this. All right. So now let's go to the main controller. This is where we can change all the different parameters depending on how we want the character to look. So you can change the outfit, the hair, the head shape, several things like that. You can even change the ears and the nose. There's so many options to choose from. So this is what we've opted for. So if we go back to our main composition, you can see that our character has actually taken the shape of these new attributes. So that's great. Next thing we want to do is we want to import the speech bubbles. Now what we want to do is we just want to import what already comes pre-built in the Untrailers. So this one, speech bubbles 21, that looks pretty good. So we're going to copy those two, 21 and 22, and then we bring them into our composition. Now, if we go to each one, let's start with this one, number 22. We want to import custom graphic to use in place of that. So gonna select that file. Make sure you select composition and retain the layer sizes. Click import. So now with that custom graphic, which is actually made up of 2 layers, we're going to copy that and then we paste that. Let's start off with layer 1 first of all. We can delete layer 2 because we don't need it for now. And then we just resize it to take the similar shape to what we had in the text. You know, what we want to do is just make sure that we link the two together so that they are bonded. And then any animation that was with the text is also applying to our custom shape that we've just imported. But because we've still got that previous layer, let's just bring the text to the foreground so we can make changes to it. And now we can hide the layer 3 and 4, which we don't need. Now we can start making changes to the text. You can even duplicate it so that we get 2 lines of text. So I'm a 30-year-old designer from New York, USA. That looks pretty good. I can always reposition it centrally, and I'll just look back at that animation. It looks great, doesn't it? Now, okay, let's go back to the main composition. All right. We repeat the same thing that we've done. And now all we have to do is just resize our custom graphics that we've just customized. And then what we want to do obviously is to separate them. So drag this one to about here, and then the bottom one, we're going to drag it to be roughly around this area. Okay, now I'm just going to play back the whole sequence. See what that looks like. We may have to reposition these two, move them about 2.5 seconds into the composition so that, you know, they come a little bit later on. Same thing with our character. We want to just make sure that he also animates into place. So let's just place a keyframe right here, and then right at the beginning of the composition, we create another keyframe, this time taking him right outside the frame. So when we scrub through the timeline, he's going to animate into place just like this. And we can even separate the two custom graphics that we've just created so that the first one animates like this, and then a few seconds later the second one animates just like that. Starting to look really, really good. The only thing we have to do now is just change the frame rate. You can change that to 24 frames per second. And then we can do a RAM preview to see how our animation looks. We're now starting the process of creating the third scene. Now for this scene, we're going to need the following sections from AinTrailers. First, we're going to need the characters, the male characters specifically, and then we're going to need the typography section as well. So you ready for this part? Let's get started. So the first thing we want to do is we want to create a brand new composition. Let's name that part 3. So for this scene, we're going to need, as we say, the male character. So what we need to do in order to animate the male character is we're going to need the main viewer. But what I suggest is we make a copy of the main viewer, and then we drag this to the timeline. You can resize it to, let's say, 70%. That looks just about right. Next, we're going to need the typography. So all we do is we take a look at the element guides, which really help us select the typography we want. In this case, we want to settle for this particular one here. That looks really good. Let's open up the typography contents, expand the long version of it, and we saw that it was number 1. So let's drag that to the timeline. I'm going to hide the main viewer for now, just so that we can get a better view of how our typography is animating, and then we can customize it exactly as we want it so that it corresponds to our storyboard. So simply make any change that you want to the font. Choose whether you want it bold or light or thin. You know, this is really the power that you get whenever you're using any one of these typography templates. So let's take a look at how that's animating. That looks pretty good. So all we have to do is just resize it to about 70%, and then we kind of position it around about there. Now let's bring back the main viewer. I'm going to open up the comp. Now what we want to do is we want to, first of all, go to the main controller. This allows us to customize things like the outfit, the hair, things like the ears. We can change the shape of the nose, and all of these are coming from our style guide template. Next, we want to change the emotions of our character. And in this particular example, we want to just change the design of the eyes. And this is based on our initial design from the very first scene. So we want to keep consistency, throughout all of these scenes. Now we want to make sure that our character appears in sync with the typography. So that's going to involve animating our character into place. First of all, let's put a position keyframe right at this point. And then at this point, we drag our character way down below the frame so that as we scrub through, he sort of appears from the bottom up in sync with our typography. That looks kind of cool. Now we want to animate the hand movements. All we do is we add keyframes for the hand movement and the positions depending on how we want the action to perform. So you may have to rotate the hand just so that we get the correct orientation, just like this. The guideline tells you which number to use for what particular action the hand is making so that it corresponds to our storyboard. Hand gestures, we see 15 and 16 are pointed finger gestures, and that's what we want to use. So all we have to do is we just change the right hand 15, the left hand 16, and there we have it. We have our character pointing towards the typography, which is exactly what we want in terms of this particular scene. So all we have to do now is just add keyframes for the hands based on the position of how we want the action to perform. Just like this. We will need to duplicate these keyframes so that we can loop the motion. Now let's go back to part 3 composition and check out the result. All we do now is we shift the position of the characters keyframes so that we cut out this initial animation, and then our character already appears with a smile. Our third scene is ready. We're now starting the process of creating the fourth scene. So for this scene, we're going to bring in an additional section from AinTrailers, and this section is called Shape Elements. So are you ready? Let's get started. So the first thing you want to do is you want to create a brand new comp. And as always, you want to label that, in this case, we call it part 4. The next thing is open your element guides and then double click the shape elements to see the array of shapes that we've got. We want this particular one here, which is shape number 8. So what we do is we import from the separate templates, we import the shape elements template. And then once you open that, we go to the square shape, and then we go to shape number 8. We drag that onto the timeline. Next, open up the male characters folder within the project. And then we scroll down to the man animation. We want this one, number 33, which is the raise one hand. This is what's going to create the character animation that we require. So let's put that in place. Next, we take the raise one hand animation and then again just move it slightly to the edge. Then we want to just put it at an angle, so rotating it slightly just like this, then just drag it into position. Now we open the raise one finger pre-comp itself. What we want to do is we obviously want to customize this character so that it looks consistent with all the other parts. So we've been through this a couple of times, so make the necessary changes. Next thing we want to do is we want to change the emotion. So to change the emotions, we currently have this one called surliness. So let's open up the element guides and have a look at the kind of face expression that we want to use. So we found one that will work. Open up the Men Faces animation folder. Then you highlight, and then whilst holding down the Alt key, drag and drop emotion on top to replace it. Now we have our character looking pretty cool. So now we want to change the emotions of our character. So first thing you do is just double click the calm emotion, which we currently have in the composition. If you go to eyebrows control and then you go to the effect control panel, you can see that by changing the number corresponding to the eye shape that we want and the eyebrow shape that we want, that's how we can start to customize the look of our character. Again, if you open the eyes pre-comp and go to the very last keyframe, we can now change that to match the pattern of eyes that we want. We can repeat the same thing with the emotions for the mouth, again at the very end of the keyframe. So in this case, we want mouth shape number 7. And now our character is going to animate exactly how we want the eyes and the mouth to move. Next, you open up the shape element so that you can change the text. So in accordance with our storyboard, simply type in the new text with non-stop ideas in our case here. Just check that it's fitting right inside the comp frame, which it is. And again, just take a look at the final part 4 composition to look at what it looks like now. That's just a matter of dragging the shape element layer and synchronizing it with the raising one hand animation. Next thing is we want to animate the character into frame. So just using a couple of keyframes, just 2 keyframes, first keyframe outside the frame and the second keyframe being the final position where we want our character. You may have to play around with the position of the keyframes a little bit to get the perfect synchronization. So now we want to bring in the light bulb as an object. So all we do here is we import this file, which is actually a light bulb icon. So we bring it into the composition, maybe change the angle slightly just like this. And then what we want to do is we obviously want to animate it into place. And maybe we can put keyframes on the scale. So in the first instance, we're going to put the scale down to 0 so that, it expands from nothing to the final size. As you see, if we animate it like this, it looks pretty cool. And there we have it. We have our part 4 completed. We're now starting the process of creating scene 5. So for this scene, we're going to need the following sections from AinTrailers. We're going to need the compositions and we're going to need the typography sections. So you ready for this? Let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we want to create a brand new composition. Let's call that part 5. Now from the element guides, let's go to compositions. And the composition we want to work with is this one right here, number 36. So next we import the compositions template into our project. Then we scroll down to the composition 36, which is what we've chosen. So what we want to do is we want to combine this composition with some typography. So in the typography template, we've chosen this one here, this number 2. So next we want to import that into our composition. So from the short folder, so drag the number 2 short typo into our composition. Next, we want to just resize it to make sure that it fills up the frame. Now, what we want to work with here is just the icons themselves. The rest of it, which is the text and all the graphics in the middle of this graphic, we're simply going to hide those layers. So now if we go back to our composition, you can turn the transparency on and we can see how it's animating into place. So the only thing we have to do now is bring in our typography. We obviously have to resize it. So let's try 30%. That looks just about right. And then we bring it all the way to the beginning of the composition so that it animates in sequence with the icons. And then it looks something like that. So now all we have to do is to customize our text in accordance with our storyboard. And then let's see how that's animating into place. That looks really good. And there we have it. Scene 5 is ready. We now want to start the process of creating scene number 6. So in this scene, we're going to need additional sections from AinTrailers, such as infographics and icons. So ready for this? Let's get started. So the first thing you want to do is you want to create a new composition. Let's call that part 6. This, as we already mentioned, is going to contain infographics as well as icons. So if you, in the elements guides, you can see the kind of infographics that come prepackaged in AinTrailers. So several different options. We're going to use 2 of these in this particular composition. So we'll need to import the infographics template into the project. So we're going to do that now. Click import, and that brings it into the project. Next, we want to bring in the icon templates. Again, if we just open our element guides and go to the object icons images, we can see the vast array of options that we want. All we have to know is which category they're coming in from. So from the weather, we can take this sun and then have a look at additional categories. In the corporate, we can take that particular one. And then from entertainment, we'll take this one, number 9. So those are the 3 icons we're going to need. So all I have to do is to import the weather icons, the corporate icons, as well as the entertainment icons. So import those into the project file. So starting off with the infographic elements, once we expand that, we see under multiple, in the folder called multiple, we've got this horizontal bar scene. So we're going to need that, as well as the circle scene, which is scene 1. And we're going to need 2 instances of that. So make a copy of that and then bring both of those scenes into the composition. So now we've got these 3 elements in place. Just simply place them into position just like this. Now we're going to open up the weather icons and we want the sun. We'll bring it into the composition. Then next, we want this tablet. Again, we'll bring it into the composition. And then the last one we need is coming from the entertainment, which is this mask here. So we've got those 3. So we highlight all 3 and then let's resize them to something like 20%. That should work. Move them out for now and then just distribute them again equally like this. Just make sure that they're well aligned. We don't need this text here, so all you do is simply turn its visibility off. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to customize the text so that it matches our storyboard. So I'm simply going to go ahead and make changes to the default text that came with this template. Now we can change the values of each of these elements in accordance to how we want it to match the storyboard. So if you just check, this is how it's going to animate. We're going to repeat the exact same thing with the second infographic. Now we go to the horizontal bar scene. Again, just make the changes that are required to the labels. In this case, we only need 4 out of the 5 available bars. So all we do is we simply highlight the 5th bar and just make that invisible. Next, we're going to head over to the control section. Again, place the cursor on the second keyframe and start making the changes to match how we want to represent the values of these info bars. The last thing we want to do with this horizontal bar scene is just to change the color of the bars itself. In this case, we're simply going to use the color picker. Now it's time to add the text for each of our infographics. And you simply do that by adding a text layer which you can duplicate and then simply make the changes to the text and then drag it into position above each of the infographic elements that we've got. Next, we want to animate the text as well as the infographic elements. Now it's time to add the text for each of our icons. You can also make changes to the color of the text. What we want to do is obviously want to animate it into place, and maybe we can put keyframes on the scale. So in the first instance, we're going to put the scale down to 0 so that it expands from nothing to the final size. As you see, if we animate it like this, it looks pretty cool. And that's it. Our 6th scene is ready. So we're now starting the process of creating scene 10. You'll notice that we've jumped from part 6, now we're at part 10. That's simply because parts 7 to 9 have pretty much the same type of tasks that you've seen us demonstrate throughout. So for that reason, we're just going to go straight to scene number 10. So for this scene, we're going to need sections from the AinTrailers, typically the typography as well as the display elements. So you ready for this part? Let's get started. So the first thing you want to do is you want to create a brand new composition, and we're simply going to name this part 10. And now we want to import from our separate templates folder. We want to locate this display elements template. So let's import that into the project. Then we go to the element guides, help. Then we're going to go into the display elements. So this is the one we want, number 2, this iPad that looks really good. So let's go to the folder. We obviously want the animated version, and it was number 2, the black iPad. So let's bring that into the composition. So obviously you have to resize it. So just make sure it's well in place, like this. The next thing you want to do is, let's take a look at the typography that we want to bring into this scene. This one looks good. So we've taken a note of the number. We go to the typography folder. Then we want the long version, number 5, and then we bring that into the part 10 composition. Just resize it and then make sure that it's taking up the correct place in this scene, just like this. Again, you may have to just tweak the position. Let's put this iPad at a slight angle, so just change the rotation slightly. That looks good. Now we just want to add this shape element, so let's go with this circle shape. Okay, let's bring that into the composition. Then let's go to the fill just to change the color. This one looks rather nice. Obviously we want to bring this to the background, so bring the layer down. Let's take a look at it now. Okay, so now we just want to animate the shape so that it starts off with a scale of 0% going all the way up to 100. Just like this. So now let's open up the typography composition and let's change now this text so that it matches the text that we have on our storyboard. You may have to resize some of the text. That's quite normal. Just like this. Move its position so that everything is exactly at the same distance from that line that we've got. So some of my work, just like this. Now you see this shape is not the right size. So all you do, let's unhide all the layers and let's unbind this layer. So let's remove its parent first of all, so that this allows us to increase the length of this layer number 8. Now we can bring back the parent, the bonding, and now the word fits perfectly inside the label. Some of my works, that looks great. Okay, you can just resize it so that the proportions look good, just like they do now. And then obviously you can also change the color of this line. In this case, we're opting for this blue tint. Now let's take a look at the composition itself. Yeah, that's really starting to look good. May have to resize it slightly, move it into place again. So now we open up the iPad composition so that we can change the contents. So we want to make sure we fill this with examples of the work. So first thing we want to do is let's import the graphics that we want to use. So we've got these 3 images here, which are going to represent the portfolio that we want to slide inside this iPad. So if you right click and click new comp from selection, that will create a new composition. That's fine. We can leave it at that duration. Click OK. So now we have those 3 images inside another pre-comp. Now we want to just displace each one of these images so that they are one after the other. And then all we do is we add keyframes at the same position. and then add another set of keyframes, about a few seconds in the timeline, so that it animates from left to right like this. So you can see all the three images animating into place. Now, if you go back to our iPad holder, what we want to do is we want to replace the contents of the iPad with this beach scene that we've just created. So all you do is you highlight the video holder composition, then you also highlight the beach composition you've just done. Then holding the Alt key down, you simply drag the beach one composition on top of the video holder and then let go. And once you do that, the video holder gets replaced by the beach scene that we've just created. Okay, all that's left now to do is to put it in the exact place where we want it accurately. Just make sure it aligns exactly as we want. And now just check for the animation. Yeah, that's looking really good. Now, if we just go back to the main composition, we just now need to optimize the timing of everything. The timing of this animation. That looks really good. We're now starting the process of creating scene 11. So in this scene, we're going to need sections from AinTrailers, specifically compositions. So you ready for this? Let's get started. So the first thing you want to do is you want to create a new composition. Let's call it part 11. Okay, so now let's take a look at the element guides. So if we open compositions and just scroll through to have a look at what options we've got, this is the one we want to use in this particular composition. So let's open up compositions, scroll down to the one we've just found, valuable features. That's the one. So let's resize that, so reduce the scale. Next, we're going to take a look at the object icons and then identify 4 substitute icons that we want to use instead. So one from travel, one from sport. You can take one from vehicles. This bicycle looks good. And then from general, we can take this icon here as well. So now we know which icons we want. All we have to do now is to simply import the specific compositions. So we go into the folder which has got the separate object icons. So we highlight the ones we want. So sport, vehicles, general, and travel. So let's import those 4 templates. So now we double click to go into the detail of the composition itself, the valuable features composition. We can hide one layer of text. We only want to use this one layer here. So let's type in our text, which is coming from our storyboard, my free time activities. Let's rescale that. Change the font style if we want. Now that looks good. Now obviously these icons we've got here, we want to replace them with the ones that we've just imported from the individual templates. You highlight the first icon that we want to replace, and then you also highlight the one we want to replace it with. Then all you do is you drag the new icon whilst holding the Alt key on a Mac, and then you release it on top of the object that we want to replace. And as soon as you let go, that new icon takes its place, just like this. Obviously, it's a little bit big, so we can just resize it, put it into place, just like that. And then we repeat exactly the same thing for the remaining 3 icons. And now if we just play it back, this is what it looks like. Okay. So let's go back to the text tool. Now we can add Now all we have to do is just add the individual text below each icon. We need to just make sure that we can animate the text by changing its position. Have the first keyframe, put the second keyframe with the new position. You can also add keyframes to the opacity so that it fades in. In fact, we can just copy the first one and then paste it below each of the other 3 icons. And then we simply drag it one below each icon. And now all we have to do is just displace each text slightly so that it animates in sequence with the rest of the icons. So now we look at the complete composition. This is what it looks like. We may have to just reposition it just slightly so that it's dead bang in the center. And that's the end of scene 11. It's looking really good. So we're now ready to start the process of creating scene 13. Now, in this scene, we're going to need sections from AinTrailers, specifically typography and object and icons. So you ready? Let's get started. So the first thing you want to do is you want to create a brand new composition. So let's name that part 13. Then you want to open up the element guides, and the first one we'll look at is the typography. And then we have identified this particular one here. This number 7 looks really good. That's the one we want to use. So let's also look at the object that we want to import into the composition. We're looking for something like a briefcase. This one will do very nicely. So this is found in the typography folder. It's the short typo number 7. Bring it into the composition and let's resize that. Say around about 30%, that should be good. We can put it to the side for now. Next, we want to bring in the icon, which is the briefcase. So this we find in the corporate icons folder. We bring the briefcase into the composition, resize it, change the scale and then also change the position so that it takes place just like this. You may have to again move the text slightly. Now it's time to customize this text so that it corresponds to our storyboard. And this is really quite simple. All you have to do is just replace the default text with your own text, making sure that the position of the text and the size of the text looks exactly as you wish. You can also change the color of the color elements by clicking the color control and then going into the effects control, and you can use the color picker to select any color of your choice. Let's go back to the main composition. This is what it looks like. So now need to just scale everything up so that they are in good proportion of one another, just like this. Let's move the briefcase slightly to this position. That looks good. Center everything. That's perfect. And that's it. Scene 13 is ready. So we're now starting the process of building the final story. So in this scene, we're going to need such sections like transitions from the AinTrailers folder and the pre-made scenes that we've created from scene 1 to scene 15. So, are you ready for this final stretch? Let's get started. So since all the work has now been completed for all these sections 1 to 15, we can now go back to the main composition, which is comp 1, which is where we collect all the parts to create the whole video. So we want to highlight all the parts, part 1 to part 15, and then you drag them all into the timeline. Make sure you disable the visibility of all the parts, as this would temporarily boost the workflow process, making it that much faster. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to cut off each video so that it's about 10 seconds long. Now we want to place each video on the timeline one after the other, just like this. So we're going to repeat this for all the parts. So next we're going to open each part, and then we want to see where the animation in that part is ending, and then we cut off the rest of the part as soon as the animation is completed. So we're going to need to do this for each part. Now that all the compositions have been trimmed off to the exact length, we now need to arrange them precisely one after the other. So you repeat it for all the parts. Now we need to turn on scene 1 and scene 2 so that I can do a custom transition between these two scenes. Now the kind of transition that we want to do is one where this part 1, we want to animate that out of the frame. So we're going to put a keyframe right over here, and then right at the end, and then put another keyframe a couple of seconds just before that. So the second keyframe, we're going to move the position right out of the frame. So when we animate it, it's going to look something like this. Yes, this looks good. Now for part 2, just highlight all the part 2 to part 15 so that we can just bring them closer. So we're just repositioning all these parts so that our transition is falling in exactly the place where we want. So next we want to import the transitions template, because for the rest of the transitions, we want to make use of the beautiful transitions that come packaged with AinTrailers. So the one we want is this one here, random corner shapes. That is a really good one of my favorites. So let's bring that into our time frame just like this. We're going to place it right above part 2. And sort of like between part 2 and part 3. You notice we've got 3 kind of like markers. The marker that is called filled means that at this point, the composition will be fully filled with the transition. So make sure this marker is placed at the end of the upper composition. In our case, at the end of part 2. Next, we then cut off the transition where it's ended. So next we duplicate this transition and apply it to all the other parts by using the exact same principle. So now that all our scenes have been linked using transitions, we can now turn on the visibility of all the layers and take a look at the result. So to complete the story, we're going to add a few touches of brilliance. You can add a music track and or a voiceover. In our story, in this example, we're simply going to use a music track. So simply going to import this audio 1 track. So we import this audio track into the timeline. And then at the end of the video, just make sure that it fades out smoothly. One of the last things we want to do here is, if you notice, each imported section contains composition 00 full HD. So inside here, you'll find there are 2 layers for color correction. Colors will be a lot richer and a lot nicer if we import this and paste it into our project. So we're simply going to copy it and then we paste it into the main composition comp 1. And with that, that completes all the final steps that are necessary. You obviously want to optimize your project so that it runs smoother and faster. So one of the easiest ways to optimize is to remove any unnecessary elements from the imported templates that we've been using. So the first thing we want to do is take a look at the size of the project before optimization. So let's start in the character section, for example. We've only used a few animations. So we can remove most of the ones that we haven't used. So the easiest way to do this is to highlight all of the elements that are contained within this folder, and then uncheck the ones that we know we've used, which means all the ones that remain selected can now be deleted. Confirm the deletion, and that's it. Now go to each and every template that we've imported, and we repeat exactly the same thing. All you want to make sure is you want to get rid of any element that we have not used, because this will really optimize our project file so that it runs smoothly. With the weather icons template, for example, we did not use any of the static version of the icons, so we can delete that. We can also delete all the other unnecessary icons that we didn't use. So repeat the same principle, just delete anything that's unnecessary from the rest of the templates. So once you've done that, go to File, Dependencies, and then you want to scroll down to Remove Unused Footage. Click that to confirm, and then you'll be prompted with this dialog box that is requesting us to delete this footage that we don't need. Simply click OK to confirm that. Now if you take a look, you can see how much easier it is when you scrub through with all the parts visible. Now when you save this project file, we take another look at the project file, and you see the size is reduced by almost 2 times. And that's how you optimize the project file.